Migration and Asylum. And last but not least, Luigi Estero, Head of Justice and Home Affairs Division at the Italian Minister of Foreign Affairs. I want to remind to all of you that you can as you know, I should follow some instruction that the organizer gave me. So I want to be a good chair, and I will follow the instruction. So all of you, to the speakers, you have 15 minutes, 15. I will not be brutal, but I will put all my effort to keep you on schedule. The second is that, as you heard before, we are recording also this roundtable, so people attending the roundtable agree on being recorded. And then we will have a debate at the end, so please use the chat to ask questions or to comment what was said. So Professor Gilt on the new pact and its perspectives. Please, Professor Gilt, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Professor, and it's a great pleasure to be here and an honor to be addressing so many colleagues, and I'm delighted to have heard the perspectives of so many people I know. My job is to have a think about the Pact from the perspective of realpolitik, and I'm going to address three aspects. The first is, why are we talking about a pact? The second is the question of proportionality. And the third is the question of the EU's reputation. So on the first one, why a pact? When I first heard in the summer that the Commission was working on a pact, I was quite surprised, because the last time we had a pact on migration, it was produced by a French president, and the objective of the pact was to claw back competences to the member states. So I was curious to see, when the pact actually came out, whether we've now had the competence to the European Commission on immigration, asylum and borders since 1999. So we've had pretty much a 30-year run-in here. And as the speakers in both yesterday and today have indicated, the outcomes are perhaps not quite as impressive as everybody would have hoped. So I wondered if the Commission was going to throw in the towel and put together a pact which would push back to the member states responsibilities in respect of immigration and asylum. One of the things which I find particularly interesting about the debates, both yesterday, I couldn't be here in person, but I listened to them last night when we finished a PhD defense, and today, has been that there's been very little indication of that from reading the Pact, of the way in which my academic colleagues have analysed it, while there needs to be a lot more effort on the part of the member states, in this pact, the Commission is still seeking to hold on to the powers which it's got. So I think then the question is, well, why a pact? Why use this terminology, which was quite discredited the last time we had a pact, and to bundle together all of the most problematic parts of the EU's identity in respect of third country nationals, from borders, the common European asylum system, irregular migration, and somehow try and do some kind of forcing to move on the agenda. And that brings me to my second question, which is the question about proportionality. Why are we doing this? Because in the European Union, we live in an area of about 450 million people. According to Frontex's annual risk analysis in 2019, there were about 300 million people who entered the EU, of whom at least a third, if not more, were third country nationals. So we're looking at very substantial numbers of third country nationals who enter the EU every year. According to Eurostat, the member states issued over 3 million first residence permits to third country nationals last year. So we don't have a problem with third country nationals. We like them to come, we like them to visit. When they want to stay longer, we give 3 million of them first residence permits every year. We had 600,000 asylum seekers last year, according to Eurostat, slightly over that, but not very much. And we refused entry at the external border, this includes the sea border, to about 140,000 people. So a drop in the bucket. We forcibly expelled from the whole of the EU last year about 80,000 people, and that was down from the year before. So if you look at who are the third country nationals, which we feel so strongly we don't want, that we're willing to expel them, it's 80,000 people a year out of about 3 million first residence permits, at least 100 million, if not more, like 150 million third country nationals entering every year. And yet we are completely fixated on this question of particularly the common European asylum system, the external border, which we spoke about yesterday, and irregular migrants. And I think this is, from listening in particular to the discussion today, the proposals for the common European asylum system are so incredibly complex. Just these ideas that are floating around. I mean, I really enjoyed Francesco's explanation of return sponsorship, because it sounds so astonishingly unlikely. And how big is the issue? Why have we turned this issue of this fairly small number of third country nationals in comparison with our ability to happily live with lots of third country nationals, 3 million of them with first residence permits every year? What is the problem with this small number? And that brings me to the third issue that I want to raise, which is about reputation. And here I think that Violetta's presentation was particularly illuminating on this side. And this is now looking at the question of realpolitik, not from the question about whether can the member states agree, so that's first why a pact, not from the question of proportionality, what is the realpolitik of the question which we're looking at, but now reputationally, realpolitik from the perspective of the international community. And as Violetta was explaining all of the different processes, the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, the UN Human Rights Committee, the UN Committee on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination, all of the different instances which are increasingly engaged in questions around EU migration. One of the difficulties is that this brings into the international realm the attention both of governments of other states and of course publics, with the question, what is going on in Europe? Why are so many people drowning in the Mediterranean? Why is the UN Human Rights Committee having to look at EU border policies which are resulting in people drowning? Who was and who is that captain, Carola Rackete, and why is the Italian government prosecuting her? Why did the EU seek a Security Council resolution 4 years ago to deal with smugglers in the Mediterranean and now has no boats available to it, though is saying that it's a great success? Why were we promised there would be fewer deaths in the Mediterranean, and yet what we're doing is seeing fewer rescues? all of this has an impact in the respect of the reputation of the European Union as an effective, an honest, and a human rights abiding actor in the international community. I had the pleasure of being an academic observer to the stocktaking of the procedure of the Marrakesh Compact for safe, orderly, and regular migration, which was adopted 2 years ago. And one of the things which struck me most forcefully when I attended meetings of UN delegations in Geneva discussing what were the big issues and what should be in the compact, there was a palpable unwillingness on the part of many delegations to engage with many of the EU issues in respect of borders. This also comes up in the compact itself, the new compact, where the Commission states that actually this is a rather sensitive issue. When you listen to the delegations speaking in the UN about immigration, borders, and asylum, there is a real anger there that the EU is allowing people or creating the conditions of possibility for people to die in the Mediterranean. And then it's suggesting that they're somehow irregular migrants, but irregular migrants are always the citizens of some country, some other country which is represented at the EU. And they only become irregular migrants if they actually arrive somewhere and do not comply with the law where they arrive. So the internal debates of the EU and the incapacity to deal with safe arrivals of a very small number of people, under 140,000, when over 100 million arrive perfectly safely every year, is a matter which is highly politicized. You can see it in the media, whether it's the New York Times or Al Jazeera or the South China Post. There are articles about this all over the world. And it does create a sense that the EU, in the context of realpolitik, is an actor perhaps one doesn't want to work too closely with because one may be contaminated. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Hild. And now, so you mentioned also the Commission. So now the floor goes to Laura Corrado from the European Commission on the view from the European Commission. Laura Corrado, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thanks very much and good afternoon. Yes, I think the Commission was mentioned several times, so I feel sort of obliged to maybe address some of the issues that have been raised also in the previous panel in my presentation. I could not listen in yesterday, unfortunately, but I did listen to the presentation on asylum and solidarity, which were very interesting. So yeah, I will try to put some realpolitik into the discussion because after all, the Commission is a political actor as well. So first of all, there were some of the speakers that were talking about the Commission should pursue the European interest, and this has not been done enough. I mean, the supranational European interest. But then I want to be provocative a bit with you. And what is the European interest? How do you define it? Because is the European interest to have a solution which maybe is perfect on paper, if ever it exists, but then has no chance of ever being adopted and agreed by member states first and then with the European Parliament? Because if we are talking about legislation, well, it has to be agreed according to the procedure that exists. And this means that the Council has to agree at qualified majority and that the Parliament has to agree with the Council. And moreover, I think we forget that this is not only a question of like the Council, the JHA, the ministers. In the past EP term and in the past Commission mandate, I think somebody calculated that 50% of the European Council discussion were devoted to migration. Maybe it's exaggerated, it's more than Brexit, which might sound funny, but it means, and it gives also, you know, it is telling of how much politicized the issue was and still is. I think that the role of the Commission is also to take into account of all the political interests of all parties. I'm not saying only of member states, certainly not, but it cannot, the Commission cannot not take into account also what has happened in the past and how many years we have spent in discussing those issues and how deep the divisions between the member states, between the EU institutions, have been due to the migration debate. It's not only north-south, as I think Professor Tim said, it's also east-west. It's also between the Commission and the Council, European Council. And it's also, a question of lack of trust from the citizens about the system not working, being broken, the EU not being able to manage migration and asylum properly. Then I agree with Elspeth that if you look at the figures, the majority of migrants come legally. We issue residence permit to them, more than 3 million. And it's very minor, but it's a question of perception also. And the perception does matter in the debate. This is not a rational debate. You all are very rational today and made a lot of rational and very good statements. But this is also politics. And this is also taking into account the interests of the different actors, which are different because the geopolitical situations are different. And try to reconcile them. And this is also what the Commission has been trying to do. I think I don't want to speak too much at length of the past, but it's true that we had this sort of vicious circle of the member states on the first line, if we want to call them like that felt that the EU was not doing enough, or the other member states were not doing enough. The member states from the north complaining about secondary movements, and I think this Francesco Magliani or Professor Tim talked very much about the secondary movement and very well explaining, and maybe this is something overstated, but it is perceived as very important by some, and other member states that were totally opposed to any form of relocation, and some still are. And also, the Commission, as somebody recalled in the first part of its mandate, the Commission did try to go against, let's say, some member states who were perceived not to be solidary enough. And we went to court and we won the court case. But then what did we do with that? The problem was not solved. The negotiations have been completely stalled on Dublin and on all the rest. And because of everything was connected and is connected, we could not even agree on some of the proposal where there was a sort of provisional agreement, like on the EAS, on the new asylum agency, on Eurodac, on the resettlement framework, and on other directives and regulations that were on the table. So what we have been trying to do as the Commission is really to rebuild trust, first of all, so to have a basis to restart talking between member states in the first place, but also with all the other institutions and actors. And I have to say that it took also very long to the Commission to prepare the Pact, and I know it was expected months ago, for months, and it took longer than expected because we took the time, our Commissioner, the Vice President Skinas, and to really talk at length with member states, but also with the Parliament and with other actors to see how the different views and interests could be reconciled. And we tried really to put a pact, well, at least, Elspeth, I don't know who invented the name actually, I'm not sure, but I think it must be linked to the question of rebuilding trust. Maybe pact is linked to, okay, we rebuild trust between the different actors. We try to have something which can be shared and agreed. And we came with something which tries to put forward a comprehensive approach. Whether we manage or not, it's certainly object of discussion. And I think today we heard a lot of legitimate views or concerns that about some of the aspects. And I'm not arguing here that it is perfect what the Commission has put on the table, but maybe it's something that it's as good as it could be, I would say, given the circumstances and taking into account also the past and the present and the situation now. So just very briefly on a few points, because of course I cannot present everything, and also about the prospects. I think that's also interesting for you to hear. First of all, about the procedure for screening that have been discussed, the border procedures. I mean, the issue is that today, I mean, it was different in 2015, 2016, but today we have mixed flows at the borders. Mixed flows is, I mean, it's not a bad word, a bad thing in itself, but it means that there are many people that apply for asylum, which then in the end will not be recognized any form of protection. And this overburdens the asylum procedures in many member states that are simply not able to manage those. If we look at the top 10 nationalities, I have the figures here in front of me, the arrivals in Italy, and then in 2020, the nationality of people arriving most frequently, 30%, far above others, is Tunisians. I mean, these are not people that are likely, in general, to be granted protection. I mean, maybe individually, some yes, but so that's why we have tried a bit to streamline the procedure and to try to have a system whereby we can identify in a very early stage with very short deadline, but with safeguards and guarantees, which are in the proposals. What is the route? I mean, is the person going to go into an asylum procedure? And if so, is it a border procedure, a normal procedures? Or is the person that has no entitlement to receive protection and should go rather into a return procedure? With all the safeguards that are in the acquis for asylum seekers and for any person also for returnees under return directive. So there are safeguards. Of course, and I also would reject the claim that the Commission made proposals which are against the Geneva Convention. I mean, they can be criticized on many grounds, but certainly not on that ground. I mean, you will have seen that the UNHCR, which is sort of the guardian of the Geneva Convention, overall issued quite a positive opinion on the new migration pact. I mean, I'm not saying the UNHCR is endorsing totally, but they have not criticized the provision, certainly not on grounds that it does not respect the Geneva Convention. So this, I think, is the only claim I would reject. All the rest I accept as a legitimate views and criticism from your side, but not that our proposal do not respect the rights of asylum seekers. And certainly not that there are asylum seekers are considered as such as irregular migrants. Not at all. I think really the objective is to be able to identify at an early stage, not after 9 months, 1 year that the person in the asylum procedure, that the person are not entitled to protection. And therefore either they have another ground, which is possible to remain in the EU, or they have to be returned. This is also a question of ensuring a bit the functioning of the system and the efficiency of the system. It's not a question of criminalizing migrants or sending them away. This is not at all the case, because as you have recalled, more than 3 million of residence permits, first permits, are issued to migrants by EU member states. So this is not at all the case. So then when it comes to solidarity, the solidarity mechanism and going beyond Dublin, well, I acknowledge that the system is complex, remains complex. And there are different scenarios that take into account the different needs of the situation. So for situation of pressure, crisis, and search and rescue, and I think this has been very well explained, so I will not go into details. This is just to say that what the Commission has tried to do is really to create a system of mandatory solidarity, but with flexible ways of providing this solidarity. And indeed, it's not only about relocation, it's also about return sponsorships, and it's also about other measures. But there are corrective mechanisms if the pledges and the places for relocation are not sufficient, and indeed it's the assessment of the Commission, then there are corrective mechanisms to ensure that relocation is a significant part of solidarity. And all of this knowing that, I mean, there are few member states that are totally opposed still to relocation, but still we consider that this should be part of solidarity, not only relocation, but be part of that. Now, the return sponsorships, I mean, I listened very carefully, and I mean, I can confirm also from the first discussions that have taken place with the member states that it's a mechanism that is new, innovative, and that will require a lot of discussion and possibly fine-tuning to make it really operational. That I acknowledge. And we will have, we will appoint also what is called the return coordinator in the Pact, which really whose function would really be to coordinate better the procedure amongst the member states, because there are a lot of inefficiency on how many member states today organize the return procedures. So that there is, of course, the issue of cooperation of the third countries and so on, but there are also a lot of inefficiencies. Now, the objective of these return sponsorships is simply to say, I mean, I would say two things on that. The first is that when we came with mandatory relocation systems under the previous commission, I mean, as I said, and as you know very well, there has been a total rejection by some member states of that. And they argued, but the EU should focus on controlling the border and on return of irregular migrants. Now the Commission came with, okay, relocation is important, is one of the elements, but then we also have another instrument, innovative instruments, on which, I mean, those member states that consider that they are better in returning people because they have better connections with third countries, better diplomatic connections, well, then they can play a role and support other member states. So in a way, it takes away some alibis to some member states. Let's see, I mean, how this will be operationalized. But I think it's important to have this in the tool of solidarity measures together with others. Now, another thing I want to mention, this was not very much discussed today, but and also when we talk about the Pact, it's forgotten, but it's also the area I am responsible for and that I like most, which is the legal pathways. And it is an important part of the Pact as well, even if the measures announced will be for later, except we have the resettlement recommendation, which I think was discussed yesterday, and which really encourages member states to continue to engage on a growing path for resettlement and complementary pathways. So this is important, and we will continue to provide incentive to member states for that. And then on the legal migration, we have announced some proposal for next year on which we will be working as well. So I would say this is part of the Pact. It attracts less attention, but it's as important as the other measures. And of course, I fully agree that, you know, if you want that people do not use irregular routes to come, then there have to be lawful opportunities for coming. That I totally agree with that, for sure. And for the moment, there are some, but not enough. So this, we will also be working on that. And also on the integration, I profit to mention that we will adopt an action plan on integration and inclusion on the 24th of November. Now, for the prospects for the future, now very, very briefly, because I think I'm already late. Now, at the moment,
you are on schedule. You are on schedule, don't worry.
Great. I can say something for the future. Good. So the discussions have started on the council side, at least on the German presidency, and the German presidency, I mean, considered the proposal and in general the council as a good basis for discussion. So this is already, I would say, a first objective achieved, because I mean, I think that nobody in the Commission thought that this proposal would be considered satisfactory by anyone, totally satisfactory, but being a basis for discussion at least, and I'm talking now about the Council, then we will hear about the Parliament later on, it's already something, it's a starting point. At least the discussions have resumed. The German presidency has now the objective to have a document with a political understanding on the key elements of the Pact and the way forward. Of course, this will be a political document, not an agreement on anything, which then should pave the way for the Portuguese and future presidency to continue the discussions on the legal proposal. Of course, devil is in the detail. Even if we would manage to have an agreement on the key elements of the Pact, a broad understanding under the German presidency, then of course you have to negotiate all the proposals in details, and we have 5 plus the 4 that were already on the table, which the Commission has not modified because there was a provisional agreement, but which of course are part of the puzzle as well, and will have in some cases maybe be slightly amended and modified as well. So that will take time. I mean, I don't want to make any forecast in timing, but it will take time, because one important question that is also the question of the packaging of the proposal. As I said, in the past, many member states refused to agree on any proposal, even operational one, like the one strengthening the powers of the Asylum Agency, which is uncontroversial. I think all the member states and the parliament don't have big issues with that. But many member states had this package approach, which meant we don't agree on anything until everything is agreed. And of course, there is the risk that the same dynamic will be applied to the current package, while of course also from the Commission perspective would be important to progress at least on those files where there was a provisional agreement, if then this is confirmed by the Parliament also on the various proposals that are on the table. That would be good. If I think of the resettlement framework, of course it would be good to give us a predictable, stable framework for resettlement for the future. But there are linkages of this proposal, for example, with Eurodac and with others. So that's a big question, which could again lead us to complex negotiations where everything is linked and it will be difficult to progress. We hope that this will not be the case. What I can say is that, of course, there are still different positions within the member state, within the council. But I mean, we really hope that there will be at least, that this is really the basis for an agreement on the package as a whole, not as necessary as the Commission has put it on the table. It's never the case, but fulfilling the objectives that we have, that we had with this, of having indeed a very solidarity, effective and meaningful solidarity amongst member states, because the EU has to manage migration together. It's a common phenomenon to manage. And also, of course, clear rules on the responsibility. These have been very well explained before, but this is also one objective. And to have really a comprehensive approach on migration internally and externally. I did not mention all the external part, which is also a very important dimension in the new Migration Pact. And it's not only about readmission and return. I know that this is what strikes most, but it's really a comprehensive approach. We have also launched the talent partnerships idea, which will build with what we have done so far in terms of developing projects on legal migration. So it's really something that we want to build more and develop with third countries to comprehensively manage together migration flows. Again, this will take time. It's not something that you can improvise and you can just announce, and it will require quite some work. But it's certainly also a very important strand of our pact. So I will stop here. I'm sure there will be many questions afterwards, but I let other speakers speak first. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laura Corrado. A question that will be for sure from my side, because I think that on the legal path, the legal pathway, there are some, let's say, it's the less developed part, even if it, in my opinion, it could be the most important one, the pillar of a new approach. But okay, we will go back later. And from the European Commission to the European Parliament, Laura Ferrara, please, you have the floor, the view of the European Parliament.
Thank you very much. Good evening to everybody. A warm greeting to all the speakers, and thank you very much for the invitation on this event. Yeah, first of all, I heard the speech of Madame Laura Corrado from the European Commission, and I heard about the intention from the European Commission to enhance the trust between member states, the goal to introduce innovative instruments in the new pact, and I don't want to be very pessimistic, but frankly, I think that yeah, we don't find this kind of elements in the new Pact on Migration. We are perfectly aware that it was really difficult to deadlock the situation, to deadlock the political debate, in particular in the European Council. But yes, it's a starting point, as Laura Corrado said, but maybe the European Commission should be more innovative, more courageous. I remember when during an hearing, the president of the European Commission, Madame von der Leyen, said we will abolish the Dublin regulation. And when we heard that, we all say, wow, this is really a good news. This is what we are expecting, because we all know that the main problems derive from the criteria inside the Dublin regulation, and in particular the principle of the first country of entry, because according to that principle, there is no fair share of responsibilities among all the member states of the European Union. But finally, reading the new pact, we don't find a real abolishing of the Dublin regulation. We find new terms, new definitions, new terminology, but the content is substantial, the same of what we had in the past. But maybe I'm pessimistic, and we need to start, we as the European Parliament, we need to start to work on all of these first 5 legislative proposals, and we perfectly know that we have a delicate role in examining these legislative proposals. Another point about the package approach, the European Parliament defended a lot the package approach, not only for technical reasons, but also for political reasons. The technical reasons is that we always talk about common European asylum system, and before starting to work to the reform in 2016, working to the reform of the European Common Asylum System, we worked on a INI report on a holistic approach to the management of migratory fluxes. So that means that all the regulations, all the directives, all the rules, the European rules are strictly connected. And that's why we need to have a package approach, because if we just have an intervention on a single one and we leave all the other ones because of political problems, we always will have an incomplete system that will not work. So this is the technical reason, and the political reason is clear. It's simply because if we allow to go ahead all the other files, all the files that are easier in a political point of view, the main ones, such as the Dublin regulation and the asylum procedure regulation, will still remain on the table of the European Parliament, or in particular on the table of the European Council. So it's important to proceed in a package approach, to have all the files at the same level of negotiations. We talked a lot about the tragedy of Moria camps and the inhuman situation in the hotspots. But again, I don't want to be pessimistic, but it seems, reading these new legislative proposals, that the situation will remain the same, or will be even worse than the actual situation. Because frankly, if we will say there will be no Moria, we are lying. because if we introduce a compulsory, a mandatory border procedure, if we introduce the screening procedure, if we introduce new steps, new procedure that are mandatory, we are introducing more time, more burdens, in particular for the first countries of arrival, and this will not facilitate the situation, and it will be worse not only for the countries that will have the responsibility to receive the asylum seekers and to evaluate each single application, but the situation will be worse also for asylum seekers, because they will be they will be detained for more time, and they will be maybe also in a kind of limbo, because we find a legal fiction of non-European territory when we talk about the screening procedure, that in a legal way is really strange to understand, because we don't know what will happen in this non-EU territory. I mean, which kind of rules should apply, and which kind of rights will apply for asylum seekers. I mean, it's really hard to understand in practice how this new kind of instruments, new kind of procedures can facilitate the situation. And about safe legal pathways, I agree with Professor Marco Borracetti when he said this should be the main point, the pillar of the common European asylum system. And it's a pity that we don't find anything in these first 5 legislative proposals. I was present when Commissioner Johansson announced that during the next year there will be the presentation for legal pathways for workers, because until now we just have the so-called blue card, and we perfectly know that blue card is only for skilled persons, and we need to find a solution and legal pathways also for workers that are not so skilled. But maybe we expected to see it before in this first legislative proposals, and not only for workers, migrants, but also for asylum seekers. But that is what we have. So yes, just to go through the 5 legislative proposals. About the first one, the proposal for a regulation on asylum and migration management that would replace the Dublin III regulation. So it aims to define a common framework for the management of asylum and migration in the EU. And it aims to define the criteria to determine the member state responsible for examining an application for international protection, and to introduce a new solidarity mechanism. So the problems that we see in this first, the concerns that we see in this first proposal are, first of all, as I said before, the principle of the first country of arrival. I asked that to Vice President Skinas during a hearing in the European Parliament in the Libe Committee. As I asked why we still find this principle in the legislative proposal, if this principle was one of the main problems between member states, and it was one of the cause of the lack of trust between member states. And he spontaneously answered that there was no agreement between member states on solidarity mechanism. And there was no agreement between member states on relocation mechanism. So the only way was to keep this principle and to introduce a system, a solidarity system, that is, as also Laura Corrado said, is mandatory, but is flexible in the ways that could be applied. But also in the solidarity mechanism, we find something that we frankly don't understand very well. That means that, for instance, if the first entry country fails to comply with administrative terms or time limits to carry out the transfer, this is one of the cases when there is this is one of the cases when the transfer won't be carried out. So if this solidarity mechanism is created, is thought to help the first country of entrance, we don't understand why we find this this clause, this case that is easy to. It's very easy to imagine that in many first country of entry will be not able to comply with terms and with and administrative burdens. About also the solidarity mechanism. About the solidarity mechanism, as I said before, it's a complex system of rules, and frankly, it seems not so easy to put in place. I mean, if we read it, it seems to work, but finally, when we start thinking how it could be applied in practical terms, is not so easy to put in place, and finally it seems unworkable. And then about the proposal for a regulation addressing situations of crisis and force majeure in the field of migration and asylum. About that, there are some concerns, first of all, about what is the crisis situation. It's not something that we can define in legal terms. I mean, which are the criteria to evaluate a situation as a crisis situation? And for instance, could the situation in Greek island be a valid example? I mean, we don't understand which are these criteria, and if is it possible to establish it in the regulation. And we need to see how this could apply in reality in order to analyze the potential jeopardizing risks of these derogations for the institution of asylum. And furthermore, some fears concern the concept and the meaning of force majeure, because even the force majeure could be invoked for dangerous derogations that could penalize fundamental rights and also the states of first entry if it were invoked to avoid obligation of solidarity. Then about the proposal for a regulation introducing a screening. As I said, introducing my speech, there are many steps that are added to the actual procedures. And this screening procedure involves a preliminary examination of the health condition and possible vulnerabilities, the identity check, the registration of biometric data, a security check, and all of these things have to be done in 5 working days. So first of all, there is the questionable legality of the procedure location outside the territory of the EU. It's easy to imagine that the main responsibility and burdens for carrying out the screening is in the hands of the entry countries, and they are as in a limbo, in a no man's land, and during this procedure, it's hard to understand which kind of rules, which kind of regulation will apply. I remember that I also asked to the European Commission during the hearing in the Libe Committee what will happen in this non-EU territory, and why they introduced a new mandatory procedure, because I was rapporteur in the past legislature of the Asylum Procedure Regulation, and I talked with the government of many member states, asking if they preferred a mandatory or an optional border procedure. And many of them answered that they preferred an optional procedure for many reasons. Because a mandatory border procedure means that all the member states have to provide more human resources, more logistic centers to receive migrants, and all of that has costs, and costs that are a burden for member states. And the European Commission answered that there are the EU funds that can be used for this kind of expenses. So even if each member state has to provide for more human resources and more centers, the construction of infrastructure to receive migrants, there are EU funds that can be used to deal with that. But it's not so easy as it seems, and that there is no. This is not true that there is no. There is no fiction. So it is not true that there is a no EU territory where the asylum seeker has to wait before enter the European territory. But again, this is not clear, and this is a question that many of the members of the European Parliament raised during the hearing. So
you have 3 minutes.
Yes, I will conclude saying that there are many points that has to be clarified. We have to work very hard. We completely understand the intentions of the European Commission, but frankly, maybe our expectations were different from what we saw in the new legislative proposals. Many thanks.
Thank you very much to Laura Ferrara. I will be back after the fourth speaker. So from Brussels, we fly to Rome, and to Luigi Estero from the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, that will give us the view from Rome that could be very interesting from the perspective of the title of the roundtable, focusing on Realpolitik. Please, Luigi Estero, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and good evening to everyone. Thank you for this invitation and for the opportunity to share our view with you, and also especially to hear so many brilliant and interesting interventions, majority of which I completely share. just as an introduction, I can say to you that we are following the negotiation on the Pact in a close coordination with the Ministry of Interior and the Department of European Affairs, and also with the Office of the Prime Minister Office. So just to confirm that, yes, it is still a very important political issue, migration, for several reasons, for reason of public perception, for reason of political nuances, but also for a very substantial reason, because migration is a phenomenon that is very difficult to underestimate. So it is not surprising to me that it is still one of the most important issues that we have to discuss also at the European level. As the colleague Laura Corrado from the Commission said before, the Commission chose to have a close interlocution with the member states before presenting the Pact. So this, we think, was a very good method, and we have an intense interlocution, and this is why perhaps the Pact have some content that is very important to us, and we are happy with them. I just can mention here the multi-level approach, the comprehensive approach. That was always one of our main requests in the previous institutional cycle. I can also cite here the emphasis of on the external dimension. It is very important also to us, as Laura said, and we must discuss more about this, because also in this new sphere, we, of course, we can give our contribution to make this external dimension more effective. And then another specific thing that was always among our priorities, the question of the SAR operation, the specificity of SAR operation, and the specificity of maritime borders. This always was, of course, a matter of our concern. And for the first time, the new Pact recognizes that there is a specificity to be dealt with. At the same time, for briefly give you which is our evaluation on the documents, on the proposal of the Commission, should follow on it under principle lens, because this would lead us too far. We have to check this proposal on the effectiveness of the proposal, on the possibility, on how this will work. This is our main issue, main concern. And of course, here the evaluation changes a bit, because we have the impression that, like it is, the proposal, it is not, would not work properly. I would start with one of the very interesting things that Laura Corrado said, the fact that most part of the migration fluxes are today mixed fluxes. It's not just fluxes of refugees or people seeking for international protection. Are mixed fluxes means that there are the majority of people arriving at our borders that practically will not be eligible for a form of international protection. This is, of course, a matter of understanding the different categories, but I think that the people really eligible for a form of international protection are fluxes. And this is something that we have to analyze in depth, because perhaps the cure for this, the Commission or some member states, they can imagine that the cure is to increase our repatriation capacity. But of course, it is just a fictional cure, because we know that it is not so easy to repatriate a large number of people arriving at the border. So we are convinced that this majority of people coming to our territory are also the object of this solidarity and fair sharing of responsibility. That is the principle that the treaties establishes, like the mantra for the European policy of migration. So the solidarity and the fair sharing responsibility should also deal with the large majority of people coming into Europe. And then we will follow the second juridical or legal fiction, as Laura Ferrara called it very correctly. The fiction that the people that come to the European borders that are not eligible to one form of international protection can wait for something happening at the borders. They cannot enter the European Union, but they can stay at the borders, just waiting something happening, the repatriation of the completion of the asylum procedure. This is also another juridical legal fiction. We all know that the majority of people will enter the territory of the frontline member states, and with this entering also would start the burden, the responsibility, all the consequences that we know. Third step is the pre-screening, pre-checks and border procedure. They are built on this juridical legal fiction, and that are mandatory, they are very precise, so they are another burden on the first arrival countries. Then we have the responsibility, as it was very clearly and perfectly pointed out. The Dublin regulation is still at the core, at the center of the new regulation. So we would have expected to have more courage in this, but the Dublin system is still there. It's the center, the cornerstone on the system, and the responsibility for the country of first entry also is there. In comparison with all this combination of elements that I mentioned, there are then the solidarity mechanism. All of you today, also the very interesting intervention in the previous session of previous panel, pointed out that the solidarity mechanisms are very aleatory, are not efficient. We have serious doubts that they can work, and if they cannot work, the element that would have balanced the maintaining of the Dublin regulation at the center of this proposal will lack. So we have an increase, in a way, and there's a severe responsibility on the countries of first entry, but mechanism of solidarity that would not work, because of course the title is mandatory solidarity, but the complexity, the richness, the bureaucracy linked to the procedure, of course, indicates that this mechanism would not work properly, especially because there is also here in the solidarity mechanism, there is this famous intervention of another sphere, the one of the return, of course, increasing the capability of the European Union in having more return, more effective return, cannot be linked with a solidarity mechanism. Of course, for us, the only way to have a solidarity mechanism that would properly work is to have a relocation of real people arriving at the borders. A relocation, we know that there are not consensus on have a relocation of all migrants coming at the borders, but we would call for at least a relocation of a majority of them, or a wider number of them. So just to conclude, and I would like then to perhaps better to leave the floor to the question that perhaps is more interesting. How we see the perspective of this proposal. We think, and I think that this view is shared also with the other member states of first arrival, meaning Spain, Greece, with the other countries, that we have to we need to revise very well this balance between responsibility and solidarity, because a real sharing of responsibility is the only factor that can build up that trust that would be at the basis of a new pact, because otherwise, without a way to find a better balancing between responsibility and solidarity, I think that we could not conclude that the pact is based on trust. Today in the afternoon was also mentioned the factor of predictability. Of course, it is a very important factor, and we know that, especially, for instance, on our concern on SAR operation, but in general on solidarity mechanism, we should count on predictable mechanism, leaving behind ad hoc solution that prove to be not efficient, not enough. In that sense, the Valletta agreement experience, that was of course an agreement built on a voluntary basis, but so it's different from a mandatory solidarity is foreseen in the pact. But at the same time, it had a higher degree of predictability, because it was built on the fact that practically all people arriving at the shores of the borders could theoretically and also in practical be redistributed among member states. So this is the factor of predictability that we need to have progress on the negotiation and on the pact. The external dimension, I mentioned it also among the positive aspects of the proposal, but of course it's very positive, but still it needs to be more concrete, more effective, to focus in practical on ambitious and comprehensive partnerships with the third countries, the countries of origin of the fluxes. And to have this comprehensive partnership, of course, we need to can count on a leverage, in all the aspects, all the spheres of the policies that the European Union can promote towards these countries. It is true, the external dimension and the dialogue with these third countries cannot be reduced just to the element of repatriation and returns. It's not like this. Italy has, for instance, an experience in building and promoting a comprehensive partnership that can also put on the table not only the subject of repatriation and return, but also legal migration, mobility, but also aid to development, also trade, also culture. The problem is that we know that also in the Commission, but also in our internal coordination, not all are of the same on the same view, in the sense that we know that the trade has his own goals and the finality also to development. We should work more to convince that the migration should stay really at the center of this ambitious partnership. And of course, legal migration and mobility, just to recall the input that Marco Boracetti mentioned, and also the Laura Corrado mentioned before, is at the center of this goal. It is true, we have to work more on legal migration. I think that Italy also is is ready to work more because I was mentioning our bilateral interlocution with the third countries. It is based just on this. For instance, we are negotiating with Tunisia on a very ambitious partnership. And of course, there is not just part of repatriation and return, but also legal migration, other opportunities of development. This is just a last comment on the return sponsorship. The return sponsorship is based on the assumption that countries that have more experience and more leverage towards the third country of origin can help the other countries that receive massive influx of migrants in having a more close cooperation on returns. But for instance, in the case of Italy and also I think Spain, we are countries that we have both characteristics. We are the country with the most ancient experience in dialogues with third countries. At the same time, we have a massive influx of migrants. So I don't think that so many member states could help us in enhancing the dialogue with the third country. The reality is to have a real solidarity and a real fair sharing of responsibility, also on the majority of people coming, on the real migratory fluxes that are coming towards our territory. I would conclude here, leaving perhaps more room for question or intervention. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much to Luigi. Esther, very interesting. I think you contribute in a very interesting way to the debate. So I have a list of already 6 persons with questions. So I'd like to ask them to start to ask questions. The only point, in my opinion, that's what I wanted to say before, is the importance of the legal pathways from one side, is that it is a way, more legal pathways, in my opinion, means less pressure on the asylum system. That is the point. And the second point, I'm very sorry, but when I was reading the part about alternative way to for international protection seekers or people with the international protection, so in my opinion, the word is always the same: resettlement. We can use the word resettlement, humanitarian arrivals, corridors, whatever, but we are always facing a resettlement situation. And if I am right, what the Commission said was that there are 11 member states that refuse to be part of a resettlement mechanism on voluntary basis. It is the table annexes to the recommendation. So I think that also this point that has not a lot of space in the Pact is in a critical situation. But I stop immediately. The order of a question, so the list is Jean-Pierre Casarino, Emanuela Pistoria, Mario Savino, if you want, and Lorenzo Vianelli. I took note, and Violeta Moreno-Lax. This is the list for the first round of questions, and then round of answers. So Jean-Pierre.
Yes, thank you very much, Marco. Thank you also for to the speakers, really interesting. One question to Laura Corrado and one question also to Mr. Luigi Estero. Laura Corrado, well, now we know that the Pact has been made public since late September. It's been more or less 6 weeks. Have you heard anything from the third countries regarding the Pact? Have they reacted? Did they say anything to you? Have you spoken with diplomats from third countries, especially in the south of the Mediterranean? You know, I would like to know whether they ever reacted to it concretely, I mean, of course. Mr. Luigi Estero, it's quite interesting what you said regarding return sponsorship and the idea that, well, it would not add much to Italy, given its consolidated experience as applied to readmission. you have a lot of agreements, you know, with many third countries, Italy, Spain, France, etc. But well, I would like to ask you something regarding a recent agreement which we heard from the media has been signed between Italy and Tunisia. What was the meaning, what was the objective of this recent agreement which we heard was concluded in August this year? It's related to return procedures. So can you say anything about it, please? Thank you.
So, Emanuela Pistoia. You should unmute your microphone or take off the, yes.
I'm sorry, I have a problem with my headphone here. Okay, so I have a concern, which is also a question for Mrs. Laura Corrado, which is about the functioning of the return sponsorship mechanism. Well, I think we can safely assume that those states which will candidate as return sponsors are precisely those which are unwilling to host new migrants. Indeed, they candidate for as a return sponsor, not up for relocation, right? And so, how can we be sure that they will respect the rights, the human rights of those who are in the process of being expelled, given this background, this political background? So now you would answer, you would reply that, of course, they are bound to respect human rights, and the human rights system in the EU is very much about this. Under Article 51 of the Charter, each state is responsible for respecting human rights when implementing EU acts. So now, I have a problem here also with the position of the sending state. So of those states which we will send those people to the return sponsor, because they have responsibility for this too. I mean, if there is a serious perspective, I put it simply here, if there is a serious perspective for those who will be sent to those states not to have their rights respected, those sending states will be equally responsible for the breach of their rights. Now, if I were one of those states which are unwilling to host new migrants, what I will do, perhaps this is too much realpolitik, but this is exactly what I will do, is to make sure not to build a fair system for those kind of people, so that nobody, no state, should be transferring migrants who are in the process of being expelled. So in other words, this is the question, don't you think that this could lead to, again, to a deadlock, to a situation where it's simply impossible to have the system work properly? Thank you.
Thank you, Emanuela. Mario, you have the right to ask a question.
Okay, I have already written down a question for Laura Corrado, which can be summarized as such. How feasible in administrative terms is the relocation foreseen in the Pact? And there is an attached question which concerns the issue of trust between member states. Are we sure that the best way to rebuild this trust is to agree on rules that can hardly be implemented? This is for Laura Corrado. And I have another more general question for all the panelists with a specific focus on border procedure. Don't you see the risk that the proposed rules might deepen the existing problems and imbalances to the detriment of southern member states? At worst, as it was mentioned before by Laura Ferrara, for instance, the burdensome border procedure might determine more Moria-like situations. At best, we will be back to square one, to a situation where southern member states are in trouble with the implementation of very strict, demanding and bureaucratic rules on border procedure, and hence with stronger incentives to elude them. On the other hand, we will have northern member states emphasizing their non-compliance as an excuse to elude their solidarity obligations or abuse the flexibility that is attached to them. Don't you agree?
Thank you, Mario. Last three questions. Lorenzo Vianelli, then Violetta Moreno-Lax, then Christopher Hein. Lorenzo Vianelli.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah?
Yes.
All right. Yeah, first of all, thanks a lot to all the speakers for sharing their perspective. It's great to have like the opportunity to exchange with like people from the Commission, Parliament, and ministries. My question basically came to my mind when I was listening to Mr. Luigi Estero, and that's about the return. So now return policy is increasingly like a key dimension in the EU approach and also like in member state approach in this field. But as we all know, returns are quite difficult to implement, particularly with some countries, some third countries, because of course, like a state like Italy, for example, need an agreement with, I don't know, Afghanistan in order to return people there, etc., etc. As the things are right now, I think we can safely assume that a lot of returns are unlikely to happen towards some countries. So my question is, in very pragmatic terms, wouldn't it be like the time to start thinking about ways to deal with people who can be returned and therefore have to stay in the country after like the asylum procedure has been rejected throughout all the instances in appeal? Thanks.
Thank you. Violetta Moreno-Lax, 2 questions you said.
Right, thank you very much. It's only 1 question, but 2 comments as way of introduction to the question. The questions are actually for Laura Corrado, but I would like to thank all the contributors for their very insightful contributions. And so the first comment that I had in mind, I mean, when listening to her intervention, is that not qualifying as a refugee or for subsidiary protection doesn't immediately mean that migrants are not in need of international protection. I think we should remember that the principle of non-refoulement is broader in scope than any and both of these 2 statuses. And I think we should stop delegitimizing irregular arrivals, including on account of Article 31 of the Refugee Convention, which, however, it's nowhere mentioned in the Commission proposals, not even when designing the pre-screening procedure. The other comment regards the current structure of the Schengen Acquis, which as currently designed, and in particular looking at the entry criteria in Article 6 of the Schengen Border Code, requires that third country nationals are capable of showing willingness and ability to return to their country of provenance upon expiry of their visa to be allowed entry, right? However, refugees, to legally qualify as refugees, need to demonstrate the opposite, that they cannot return to the country of provenance and that they are therefore unwilling or to their well-founded fear of persecution to do that. This is why, under the current legal framework, asylum seekers can only reach member state territory as irregular migrants, unless humanitarian visas were made available on a massive scale. And this is why up to 90% of those subsequently granted a form of protection under the union system enter the union irregularly. And I'm relying on the numbers that have been produced by the European Parliament in a resolution of December 2018. So this means that action against irregular migration amounts to action against refugee flows. That's why I think we should bear in mind that although legally they are 2 different categories and asylum seekers are not the same as irregular migrants, and we are all speaking about mixed flows, when we descend to the practical policies and the practical arrangements that the law translates in the real world, we should bear in mind that at the end of the day, we are acting against the same group of people. So against this background, and this is my question, and considering the importance of legal pathways that I understand is the portfolio of Mrs. Corrado, why did the Commission not propose an EU instrument on humanitarian visas as explicitly requested by the European Parliament in its resolution of December 2018? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Last question, Professor Hein, you have the floor for the question.
Yes, thank you. It's a question to Mr. Estero. You made it very clear, I think, that Italy cannot really agree to a proposal which tries to cement, to continue a Dublin system in spite of all the failures and non-functioning that we have seen over the last 30 years. You made it in a very careful way, of course, but I gather Italy cannot really go into an adoption of these proposals, in particular of those that one, the legal instrument on the management of migration and asylum. My question is, on this view, will you have a common line with other frontline states like Greece, Spain, Malta, and others also maybe on the eastern borders of the Union? And linked to this question is if there is from Italian side a concrete alternative proposal to overcome or to replace the Dublin system. And my last question is, will Italy promote broader avenues for legal entry for refugees and asylum seekers? Italy has been, with respect to the humanitarian corridors, invented, to say so, by non-governmental organizations in Italy, and then spread over to France, Belgium, and other countries. Will, from the Italian government, there be an active promotion of opening these legal avenues, not only on a resettlement program? Thank you.
Okay, I have a last extra, because I think that could be very interesting for the debate now. So Francesco Maiani, you have 2-3 minutes. Are you able to give this comment?
Very, very quickly, because the point that was made by Laura Corrado, whom I thank, is an important one in our current predicament, and it's a point about realism. And my question is, who is a realist, in fact? And who is, writing things that work on paper but don't in reality? I mean, the answer that was suggested is that those who propose things that can garner a sufficient majority is a realist. My answer to that is that if then those solutions fall flat when they are applied on the ground, the claim of realism is not really justified. Just to give an example, we talked about return sponsorship. I understand perfectly that the concept as developed is calculated to obtain, the support of the states who are asking for solidarity while bringing on board the states that are not willing to accept relocations, and I respect that. But the problem still is that we do have a system that, in fact, in terms of solidarity, leaves a lot of unknowns on the ground, and that has the very undesirable side effect of shuttling people back and forth between states who should in reality be sent to a third state. And the question is a simple one. Wouldn't it be a lot more linear, even though politically very difficult to achieve, to get to a point where you have full, and by full I mean complete, financial and operational support for the state who is expelling a person who no longer has the right to be here, rather than taking that person and shuttling her around across the European Union? Of course, budgetary negotiations are very complicated, and it would require a big development of operational cooperation. Maybe we won't be able to have that in 10 years, but it would be a lot better than what is being proposed, I think. A lot more realist, if we want to take that in that view. Sorry for the last observation.
Okay. Thank you very much. We have a lot of time because the speakers were excellent in the first round. So I'd like to follow the same order. So Professor Gilty, if you have comments, questions, I don't know, you want to react, then Laura Corrado, Laura Ferrara, and at the end.
Yes, thank you very much. And there were no questions that were specifically addressed to me, but I'm always particularly sensitive to the use of the terminology of mixed flows. Because if we're looking at over 300 million entries into the EU every year and 600,000 asylum applications per year, it's a bit ridiculous to talk about a mixed flow, because you have a massive number of people who are entering, who don't encounter any issue, who a refusal of visa rates for Schengen visas is at 9%. The refusal of entry is about 140,000 people a year. So to talk about this as mixed flows gives a huge importance to people who are seeking international protection, which is not borne out at all by the facts.
Thank you very much. Laura Corrado, you have a lot.
I'll do my best to answer all the many questions, and not the easy ones, but I'll do my best also because I'm running out of battery. I hope I don't disappear. I'll start from the bottom, from Elspeth, which was a comment, but I would like to react on that by saying that indeed, I mean, and this is also what our commissioner will say, migration is not a problem. Migration is something that happens, is a phenomenon. So we are not, the problem is not the legal migration flows. I mean, this is member state, they manage normally, we should have more. So that's not the issue. The issue is, and maybe it's less important, let's say, if we look at the numbers, then, you know, the drama around it, I agree. But as I told you, perception and politicization of things matter as well. But that's what we have to manage better. What the flows that arrive irregular, not well managed. And it's difficult because Europe has a certain geographical position, which exposes it more than Canada. Canada can manage their flows very well in general because they are what they are. They have probably also a better policy on migration, possibly. But, you know, Europe is what it is. It's the history that it has a geopolitical. So we have a number of spontaneous, we don't want to call it irregular, mixed spontaneous arrivals. And we have to manage those better. So that's why there is so much focus there. While I totally agree that that's when we talk about migration, you know, the legal flows are much more important, much more relevant, interesting. I mean, I'm dealing with that. So of course, you don't need to convince me about this. But the situation is that there is an issue now, political problem, which maybe is made bigger than it is. I agree, but there is, and we have to solve it somehow. And that's why we are trying to introduce more efficient and streamlined procedures. At least this is the objective. Now, on the question of the realism and the return sponsorship and so on. Yes, I mean, it's not that this was not considered, the thing of increasing the financial support to, you know, just covering that with money, with EU money, which, I mean, raises issues not only budgetary, because in the end, I will argue that we are underpinning the pact with the new asylum migration fund in particular, but also the border fund and so on under the new multi-annual financial framework. So there are resources that will support member states. But also, I mean, I think, and I will ask also the colleague from Italy to say, I don't think that this is sufficient for the member states that are on the first line. I mean, relocation is very important to countries like Italy and Greece. And it's not, I mean, we have given tons of money to Greece, but also to Italy. I mean, they are amongst the highest beneficiaries, but that's not only about the money. That doesn't solve the issues, because there is a question of really actually managing the people in a proper way, in a decent way. And we know that this is a challenge in many cases, respecting their rights and so on. So money is not solving everything. Even if we would throw even more money than we have done in the past, to a member state, that would not solve the issue. So I'm not sure that this is more realistic than the return sponsorship. But I acknowledge and I admit that there are a lot of practical implementation challenges with that. And we are seeing that already in the first discussion with the member states. So we will have to work on the concept to make it work operationally. This I acknowledge that there is certainly a discussion about how to operationalize it better. Then there was the question, yes, on the non-refoulement, the Schengen acquis, the humanitarian visas. I mean, first of all, I would like to say that, of course, the non-refoulement principle applies, I mean, to everybody. I mean, this is one of the main principles of our EU asylum acquis. It applies also at the borders. It always applies. So, I mean, I don't think there is any question about it. And also member states, they always have the faculty, and they do, to also give national status of protection, humanitarian status, and as well as to regularize migrants whenever they want. Can you still hear me? Yes, I will take out the video because otherwise I'm out of battery. So, I mean, the question, and I link here to the question of the regularization. Of course, the member states, they can do it, they do it. There are different statuses are given to people. And that's why I said, I mean, people, what needs to be avoided is the gray area, is the limbo status of people. I mean, either they are given a status, protection or whatever, even a temporary, or we have the Duldung in Germany, or they are returned, because being in limbo for months or for years is not in the interest also of the person nor of any member state. So that's really what is the most important. In full respect of the Charter of Fundamental Rights, of the EU acquis, of the Geneva Convention, I think the EU, the Commission would never propose anything against the Geneva Convention. I want to reiterate that, and I refuse this criticism, sorry. Now, the humanitarian visas, well, there has been a long debate indeed with the Parliament about this. I mean, our response is already on the table. There is the regulation, which is not only on the resettlement framework, but which also create a status of humanitarian admission. And this will cover a lot of what could be covered by humanitarian visas. So and there will be incentives, a lump sum to member states, also to admit people under humanitarian admission, and also to link it to the question of the complementary pathways. No, it's not resettlement. It's something which is complementary to resettlement, on which we are working with the UNHCR as well, inter alia, just to increase the places for people in need of protection that can come under resettlement schemes, under humanitarian admissions, but also under other pathways. I was discussing just today with the German colleagues from the DAAD, and they have, for example, they had a program leadership for Syria, for students, refugees from of Syrian origins in Lebanon, in Jordan, to offer scholarships. And this is, for example, one of the schemes that we are trying to promote also to other member states. So this is a work which is in parallel to resettlement. I know there are 17 member states only that are currently resettle actively, and our objective is to expand that considerably and to provide EU financing to underpin that and to support that for sure. Then the question of the administrative capacity. Yes, it's, Mario, it's an issue in many member states. And I know that the agencies, they don't solve anything, but it's not only about the agency. It's also about money under EU budget, and there will be under the new AMF, both under the national programs. And as I said, countries like Italy and Greece have been the highest beneficiary, and they will remain, I mean, most likely in the future. There will be specific support under the, let's say, the thematic facility, which is managed by the Commission in the new Asylum Migration Fund for relocation, return sponsorship and resettlement. So specific incentive sums for that. And also, I mean, amongst the other solidarity measures from member states, there is also capacity building measure, support to reception, to asylum procedure from other member states, sending really officers, asylum officers or frontier guards and everybody. So there will be a transfer of I mean, not entirely, but I mean, there will be an administrative support also provided by other member states on top of the new agency. So I'm aware this will not be solved in a very short time, but really the idea is also to support the member states in improving the efficiency of their procedure, being at the border and asylum, as we have already done in the past years in Greece, in Italy, and in many other member states. where there are the countries. Yes, about the third countries. Well, I mean, we have reached out through the EU delegations also to third countries about the Migration Pact. And I mean, there have been so far some reactions. I mean, I am aware of. I'm not probably aware of all the discussions that are taking place, you know, by the external service with other countries. There is certainly an interest for new concepts such as the talent partnership that I had mentioned before. We need to see. I mean, there hasn't been a full dialogue, I think, with third countries on the pact because we are still discussing a bit internally. And we will reach out in the next month further to them to discuss. But certainly, as I said, the external dimension, it's a very important part of the pact. So the dialogue with the third countries will become very important. I mean, and as I said, it's not only about the readmission and return part, which is important, yes, acknowledge that, but it's more than that. It's really the aim to have a very much more comprehensive partnership on migration that we have had so far. And it will require time and work in the next months. Yeah, there was another one on the return sponsorship and the respect of rights. I mean, honestly, I'm not sure that there will be the first one to volunteer for return sponsorship would be countries that have wanted to avoid relocation. I mean, it's an option offered to them. But in any case, whatever they do, well, they will have to ensure the full respect of the rights. I mean, we have the Return Directive, which has guarantees, specific guarantees and rights for returnees, and they will have to respect them. I mean, any member state has to respect that. We will see. I mean, we are not at the stage of the implementation. And as I said, there is room probably for improving our proposal there. We will discuss now with the Council, with the Parliament. But I mean, and we will appoint the return coordinator, which, as I mentioned, should also help coordinating better between the member states. And then we will see. We still think that it's, as I said, it's not probably the best proposal, but it is the proposal that is the result of very intensive consultations, and not only with the member states, which draws lessons from the past. And which tries to offer pragmatic solutions. Then I admit that that you might disagree with that. I accept that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I see that Luigi Estero disappeared, and maybe there is an IT problem. But meanwhile, I give the floor to Laura Ferrara. I think you could react to some things that we were saying.
Yes, thank you very much. I will say just something in general. So we talked about realism, but I think that we as European institutions, we should balance the realism and the ambition. I mean, it's absolutely important to be realistic because European institutions should give answers to the needs of member states and to the necessities of member states. But I think that this could not affect this kind of thinking, should not affect the ambition of the European institution. What I mean is that, for instance, in these last days, we heard about what happened in France, for instance, that put in place again the debate that links migration to home security, migration to national security. And we also heard what President Macron said about the necessity to rethink the Schengen area to ensure more security. So that's why I think that, yes, it's true that we need to be realistic, but we always need to be ambitious to have a legal framework that could give the right answers and to don't be a tool in the hands of politics. What I'm saying is that sometimes we as the European Parliament we have the impression that the European Commission is too much in the hands of the European Council, even in this situation when where we expected a real new pact on migration, we saw how the European Council finally followed the position of the European Council. There is a lack of ambition. When I talk about ambition, I mean, maybe it's the time to really rethink the European right of asylum. We always hear about the necessity to fight against the irregular migration, but we are all aware that we live the biggest paradox in the European Union, that is the fact that for people that flee from wars and from persecutions, the only way to exercise the right to seek asylum is put their life in the hands of human traffickers. Because even if there are other legal ways, they are difficult to reach in practice. So maybe if we really would fight against irregular migration, and if we really want to fight against human traffickers, maybe we should start talking about a real European right of asylum. That means, for instance, giving the possibility to an asylum seeker, to a refugee, to move inside the European territory. I'm perfectly aware that now is so far from the political position of many member states. That's why I'm talking about ambition, and that's why I think that maybe we need something strong to go ahead and to have really something new, because otherwise we try to talk about a common European asylum system, but finally we don't see what is enshrined in the treaties, such as solidarity and fair sharing of responsibilities. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that with Luigi Estero is not possible to have this connection. From what I understood, there is an IT problem. We have some few minutes for another question. I think if there is another question, if not, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so I want to thank a lot the speakers of this fourth roundtable, Professor Gilt, Laura Corrado, Laura Ferrara, and Luigi Estero. I want to thank all of you. The debate, in my opinion, was really, really interesting, and I found it very interesting let's say that the conversation between the three actors at the political level, the European Union. But, you know, the conference is organized by ADiM and by Università della Tuscia. So, Mario, you have the last few words. Thank you very much for the organization of everything, by the way.
Many thanks, Marco. I didn't want the last word. Just let me thank all the participants, the speakers, all the other participants actively involved in the discussion. It was a 2 days debate that was extremely enriching and fruitful. I think that the only hope we can have is that this exchange between the academia and the other institutional actors will continue. So thank you very much, and let's be connected through ADiM or other networks. Thank you very much. Have a good night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye, everyone.
Grazie a tutti. Ciao.
Ciao, bye everyone.
Ciao.
Bye.
Ciao, ciao.
Arrivederci a presto.